Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of the Wish You Knew podcast. This is going to look a little different than a normal episode, so I might actually call this episode 0, and then the next one will be episode 1. I don't know. We'll see. My name is Karen Bortfett. I am the host of the Wish You Knew podcast, and I am so excited this is finally happening. I am so excited for all of you to be watching and listening. But before the official episodes start, I wanted to tell you a little bit about where the Wish You Knew podcast came from. So many of you probably know me, and you know that up until about 3 months ago, I was living in Cambodia. I'd been living overseas for about 3.5 years. And for anyone who's ever lived overseas or lived outside of your sort of birth culture, you come to realize very quickly that there's certain cultural norms, societal scripts that we've been conditioned to follow. When you are outside of your natural environment, very quickly you realize not everyone's following the same script in life, and you have to figure out what to do with that, how to navigate that, how to work around it, how to work within it, all of those great things. Which made me think a lot about people who have different perspectives and where those perspectives come from. While all this was going on, as well as lots of navel gazing, because that's a very important step in every process, I had a lot of people saying, "Oh, it's so great you're over there, you can be the voice for these people, they have no voice." I was working with deaf people, so they use sign language to communicate, which is probably also why I'm speaking with my hands so much, because that was my life, was speaking with my hands for 3 years. But that phrase of being a voice for someone else really bothered me. Even my deaf colleagues who use their hands to speak, they have a voice. Not everyone understands their voice or understands their language, but they have a voice, they have a perspective, they have an opinion. Oftentimes they had more opinions than I did, which is hard to do if you know me. But because of that, I started to think about how maybe we need to shift this idea that some of us need to be the voice for others and shift it to an idea that we all have a voice, but some of us have more access, we have a seat at the table, and those of us that have more access or have a seat at the table need to bring along others who aren't always given a platform to share their perspectives and to use their voice to its fullest potential. Combine all of that with my natural love for the idea of listening and my belief that we need to have more active listening in the world, and that's where this podcast came from. So what do I mean by active listening? This is the idea that many of us, myself included, when we are having a conversation with someone, especially if their opinions or perspectives are different than ours, we're not necessarily listening to understand where they're coming from or understand why they feel that way. We're listening to respond. We're listening to come up with a great one-liner. We're listening to see how we can tear apart their argument and prove to them that they are wrong, we are right, and they should just accept it and the world will be a better place. This isn't necessarily effective in bringing about dialogue, bringing about change, bringing about communication. So the idea of active listening is trying to understand where someone's coming from. Why is it that they hold that perspective? What experiences have shaped that for them? What belief systems guide them? What are their sort of founding principles? Hence the idea for the Wish You Knew podcast, to provide a space for people whose voices are not always heard in our society to share their perspectives so that all of us can learn from those and all of us can practice our active listening. We can engage and we can ask questions. If you haven't picked up on this already, the only way this will work is if all of you who are listening and watching now remain engaged. Definitely subscribe to the podcast. We have a newsletter. It would be great if you shoot me an email through the website so I can make sure you're on the mailing list. But the reason for that is I will put up a list of upcoming interviews, and I will also email out each time I have someone new scheduled so that you can think, what questions do I have for someone with that identity? What would I really love to know about them? And then I can forward your questions on to them and we can get them answered on the podcast so that we can sort of create a dialogue, we can learn together and learn from one another and really listen to each other. So, mention the website multiple times. You will need that address. It is wishyouKnewpodcast.com. Wish, U-Y-O-U, new, K-N-E-W, podcast.com. If you go on there, you can see all sorts of information, subscribe to the newsletter, subscribe to the podcast, read some of the blogs about where this all came from, give me all the feedback you would like to. So without further ado, I need to tell you very excited about our very first guest who's coming. This guest will be on the show when we officially launch later in September, and I hope you will all listen to the amazing, the wonderful. Just kidding. You got to go to the website to see who the first interview will be. Until next time, remember, people are people are people. Never stop listening, never stop learning, never stop loving.